When things don't go quite as planned and when things go badly, there's always plenty of blame to go around. And as human nature, it's always very important for us to scapegoat, to find the individuals or parties that we deem responsible, so that way we can put the blame in their lap, on their shoulders. And definitely when it comes to the Chicago Bears in 2014 and the state of the organization in general, there's plenty of blame to go around. And everybody is to blame. Certain parties are more to blame than others, but there is plenty of blame to go around. It takes a team to win, and it takes a team to lose. It takes an organization to implode and fall apart. All parties involved have contributed to the suck that is the 2014 Chicago Bears, and frankly, the suck and mediocrity that has been the Chicago Bears of recent years. So while I could sit there and talk about the ridiculousness of re-signing Jay Cutler to that massive contract and not learning from a previous regime's mistakes, and I could blame him for his lack of leadership and his lack of improvement and his inability to avoid turnovers, he deserves a lot of blame, but he's not the only individual to blame. I could sit there and blame the defense that fails to get any better. The defense with aging guys like Briggs and Allen, guys that have a reputation, guys that have been Pro Bowlers and all pros, and have played at a level that is far inferior to that. And I could blame them and say, oh, it's just the defense sucks. Or, oh, it's just that Cutler sucks. Well, Cutler is supposed to have so much talent around him, and that offense has been far from the elite offense it was alleged to be in 2014. They haven't scored 30 points in any game. They had several games where they had 0 points at halftime. That's a reflection of the quarterback, but that's a reflection of the offensive talent around the quarterback. That is a reflection of the play calling philosophy. You look at the defense, you say the defense has been bad and terrible, and they have been. There's no question about that, but they have been helped out by an offense that was supposed to help carry this team. I mean, there's plenty of blame to go around. You can blame Mel Tucker for the crappiness of the defense. Well, don't worry, he'll be gone in a couple of weeks. You can blame Aaron Cromer for the lack of development in Jay Cutler for leaking out there that there's buyer's remorse on Cutler's contract. You can blame him and don't worry, he'll be gone in a couple of weeks. You could sit there and blame Mark Trestman because he's the one that put together the coaching staff. He's the one that has failed to inspire these players. You could sit there and blame him because he fails to adjust. You could sit there and blame him for the listless, effortless performances we've seen out of the Bears on both sides of the ball in recent weeks. And you can, and hopefully he'll be gone in a couple of weeks. But again, those aren't the only people, the only parties that you could blame. It takes an entire team. It takes an entire organization. Then I look at somebody like general manager Phil Emery, and I see a general manager 3 years into the job that spent some bad money in free agency on the defensive side of the ball. He spent bad money on the offensive side of the ball, namely re-signing Jay Cutler with no competition to do so, with no reason to do so at that particular time, and not only that, giving him a ridiculous contract that he did. We look at a Phil Emery that has put an infrastructure in place around him when it comes to talent evaluation for the draft that frankly hasn't done that well. This is a Bears organization that under Embry after 3 years hasn't drafted that well. They've whiffed big in the free agent market, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Done a little bit better on the offensive side, but only a little bit better, but not as well as people always want to give him credit for and anticipate. This is the guy that when guys like Bruce Arians and Mike McCoy and Andy Reid were all on the market as potential head coaching candidates, he said, no, F that. I'm going to Canada to find my guy. It's Mark Trestman. There's a lot of blame you could put on Phil Emery. We could sit there and blame Trestman. We could sit there and blame Mel Tucker. We could sit there and blame Cutler. We could sit there and blame the offense. We could sit there and blame the defense. But we look at somebody like a Phil Emery and we say, well, you've put all of this in place. A lot of this blame actually goes to you. And that's right. Can't always just blame players or coaches. Who's the individual that brought in a lot of those players? Who's the individual that signed off on a lot of these coaches? Who's the individual that hired that head coach that has this team playing at this crappy level, that has this team at a 5-9 record? You got to look at general manager Phil Emery and say he deserves a lion's share of the blame, and he absolutely does. But he's not the biggest problem with the Chicago Bears, even though hopefully he will also be gone in a couple of weeks. There's one big anchor weighing down this Bears organization. And while a lot of people will sit there and suggest that it's the McCaskey family, it's Virginia McCaskey, it's this and it's that. At the end of the day, that's the ownership group. Yeah, we could sit there and argue that, but it's not like the ownership group is going to change. And it's not like the McCaskey family hasn't been running the show when they've had some success in the past. They're a profitable team, a very profitable team. The Bears are one of the bigger brands in the National Football League. McCaskies have done some good things over the years. They've done a lot of bad as well, especially when it comes to day-to-day football operations. There's no question about it. But you also just can't change owners willy-nilly either. You have to look at somebody to blame or something to blame that can be adjusted, that can be fixed, that can be changed. And I think beyond question to me, the single biggest obstacle for the Bears organization to overcome, the single biggest hurdle for the Bears organization to overcome, the single biggest barrier to this Bears organization improving and rebuilding and getting better is team president Ted Phillips. I've never understood why Ted Phillips has had such a long reign at the top of the Chicago Bears. He made Mark Hatley general manager. He hired Jerry Angelo as general manager. He has now hired Phil Emery as general manager. Whereas they always say that a general manager a lot of times gets 2 head coaches before he's fired, you're talking about a team president that's now on 3 general managers. 3 of them, and technically 4 head coaches. A team that has won 0 Super Bowls. Made it to 1, that's for sure. But more often than not has missed the playoffs and now is going on the 4th consecutive year of missing the playoffs. And in fact has only made the playoffs twice in the past 9 seasons. This is a Ted Phillips that has put the infrastructure in place. You want to talk about the Jay Cutler trade, the Jay Cutler re-signing. You want to talk about the hiring of Aaron Kromer and Mel Tucker and Mark Trestman. You want to talk about the hiring of Phil Emery. Who's the guy that was instrumental in all of that? Who's the guy that put that all in place? Who's the guy that signed off on all of these moves? Who's the guy that has a whole hell of a lot of say in what goes on in the organization? That's team president Ted Phillips. If you're a Cubs fan, you know what I'm talking about. Jed Hoyer is technically the general manager, but everybody associates it with being Theo's organization. It's Theo's decisions. It's Theo's this. It's Theo's plan. It's Theo this. It's Theo that. Even though he's technically above the general manager. What that suggests to you is that the team president has a lot of sway and a lot of influence of what goes on in the organization at all levels on a day-to-day basis, and that is absolutely true. So why would that be any different from Ted Phillips as the team president of the Chicago Bears? Knowing that with all the general manager changes and all the coaching changes and all the changes of personnel over the years, that over the past decade and a half plus, there has been one constant in place that has overseen this large period of time of mediocrity in the Bears' history. That's Ted Phillips. He's the one you should be angry at. He's the one you should blame. He's the one whose head should be on the chopping block for being fired. He's the one that must be removed. He's the one that is the biggest hurdle to improvement. He is the biggest anchor weighing down this freaking Bears organization. I have never understood why Virginia McCaskey has always had her tits so hard, or anybody within that ownership group has had their dick so hard for a guy in Ted Phillips that has overseen such a failure of an organization for the past decade and a half plus. And the one thing that he always had to hang his hat on, and the one thing that seemed to have given him, for whatever reason, a freaking lifetime job with the organization as team president, is that freaking stadium deal that was a joke and a half in and of itself. Here's what the stadium deal was with Soldier Field. Let's call it how we see it. It was a half-ass attempt to get a modernized stadium. Soldier Field was a dump. It needed to go. People were pissed about the historic parts of Soldier Field being torn down, so they kept the fucking columns down and they put a spaceship there. Of course, Ted Phillips, doing it in typical Chicago, and in particular typical Chicago Bears fashion, instead of getting either a domed or retractable roof stadium, where you could make money from that venue all year long for the organization and the city with such events as concerts, the Final Four, WrestleMania, other types of big events, what have you, a Super Bowl for God's sakes, Ted Phillips manages to get an open-air stadium there where Soldier Field was and still is. So even when the Bears get something sort of right, and they get something new, and they get something to modernize the organization, they still find a way to lowball it and completely half-ass it. So now you have a city with this football stadium that basically only gets used for 2 professional preseason games, 8 regular season games, and occasionally assorted college football games and soccer games, and that is it. All these streams of revenue that are fucking lost out on. Why? Because, the Bears have to play Bear football outside. You can't have a roof on the stadium. The fuck you can't. I don't give a damn what style of football you play. Find a style that fits the stadium, build your team around it, and win fucking championships. All that talk about Bear football, well, ding dong, dumb dicks. Bear football for most of my lifetime has largely been losing football, especially during Ted Phillips' regime. So who gives a flying fuck if some of these so-called faithful were going to get pissed off about a domed or retractable roof stadium if it meant that so much more revenue could be generated for the city every year by being able to host events, like I said, like the Final Four, like a Super Bowl, like WrestleMania, like concerts, and other big events that the city doesn't get now, that the city doesn't have now, all that revenue that's lost out. And this is the reason why we give Ted Phillips basically a lifetime job and a free pass for a half-ass job finally getting a stadium done? The one job this guy had to do was get a new stadium way back when in the late 90s. He finally got it done. And even then he still botched it. He still half-assed it. Which should have been the indication that we don't want to make this guy team president. And not only that, we put him there with the Hatley regime. And then the Angelo regime that went on for far too long with far too little production. And then now into the Phil Emery regime, who it's nothing more than Phil Angelo or Jerry Emery. What the fuck's the difference? The Chicago Bears need to be totally rebuilt from the top down and bottom up. And when you're looking for people to blame and you're looking for places to start, it starts at the very, very, very top. In this case, it's not necessarily the ownership group. That's not changing. You can go for the next best thing, though, or in this case, the next worst thing. You start off with Ted Phillips and you work your way back. The first person that should be fired within the Bears organization, the first person that should lose their job, the first person that should be victim for this mediocrity, and in particular this crap that we have seen on the field in 2014 for the Chicago Bears, is not Aaron Cromer, if you think that you're a moron. It is not Mel Tucker, again, if you think that you are a moron. It's not even Mark Trestman, again, if you think that you are a moron. It's not Jay Cutler, as much as I would like to believe it. At the end of the day, if you think that, you're a moron. It's not even general manager Phil Emery, who has put these coaches and a lot of these players and personnel in place, and the organizational infrastructure beneath him in place. Even if you think that, in a lot of ways, you're a moron. Who's the one that's been instrumental in all of these dumb dick decisions? Who's been the one that set that entire infrastructure in place beneath him? Who is the guy that has overseen multiple failed general managers, multiple failed head coaches, multiple failed every fucking thing, including a new stadium that failed to do what it really needed to fucking do? That's Ted Phillips. That's your problem. That's the person you should blame. That's the person responsible for everything that has gone on beneath him with the Chicago Bears organization for the past decade and a half plus. For all the different movements and all the different websites and all the different Twitter hashtags and all this other social media shit that you'll see. You want to start up anything and any type of movements to fire anybody? How about hashtag fire Ted Phillips? He's the problem. He's your enemy. He is the biggest burden and obstacle to the Chicago Bears beginning a complete and necessary total top-down, bottom-up rebuild. And until he is gone, nothing will change with this organization. It will just be more mediocrity for years to come. They gave this guy basically a lifetime pass for a half-ass job at the stadium. And now you see those half-ass mediocre results reflecting all throughout different levels beneath him in the organization over the past 15-plus years. It's time for Ted Phillips to go. He's the enemy. He's the biggest problem with this Bears organization.